Hear the wattage in here. Yeah, it's definitely in here. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little bit of George before we get into the Little Women girls. Sitting here, the dad's home, so I'm gonna get in here and I'm gonna keep reading. This is a new book. We've not done this one yet. And I did that for a reason. The Writings of George Washington. To Robert Dinwiddie. Fort Cumberland, January 12th, 1757. Honorable Sir, your letter of the 27th ultimo came to hand the 9th instant. I wrote to your honor by Captain Spotswood, who was charged with the care of Catawba Indians as far as Williamsburg, that I had sent Colonel Stephen with a detachment to bring the mutineers on the branch to this place in irons. They were secured before he got there, and he was brought all but 6 who deserted from Captain Joshua Lewis's company before he reached it. We have held a general court-martial on the ringleaders, flogged severally, and have some under sentence of death. The proceedings of the court I thought it needless to send or ask warrants for execution, as we had no law to inflict punishments, even of the smallest kind. I shall keep those criminals in irons, and if possible under apprehensions of death, until some favorable opportunity may countenance a reprieve. We have as many men at work here, preparing timber to strengthen the works as tools will supply, but I wish I had been ordered to build a new fort altogether, rather than attempt to repair the old one. Your honor thinks Mr. Walker's discontinuing was for want of countenance. I must beg leave to answer, and I dare believe Mr. Walker will do me the justice to declare that I have uniformly treated him with all the respect and complacence in my power. That I did not approve of his staying is certainly true. I thought it was doing injustice in the service for him to be absent when his presence was requisite, and mentioned this circumstance to him accordingly. And since the subject hath been mentioned, I beg leave to add that if your honor conceives Mr. Walker has been at any trouble in laying in provision, you have been exceedingly misinformed. He left the service the last of June or 1st of July, and has never done a day's duty since, either in making contracts, directing the purchases, or concerning himself in any manner whatever with the business. Nay, no more than a stranger would do, but either declined the service altogether at that time, or intended to throw the principal burden of his office upon me. Had Mr. Walker continued to discharge the duties of his commissary, I never should have thought of any other, as there is the greatest friendship between us. The part I have acted with that gentleman I should have acted with my brother, had he been in his place. But to acquit myself of all suspicion of his sword, I shall observe that there never was the least disagreement between Mr. Walker and myself, either in words or actions, before he left the service, since which I have never seen him at this place until he came in December to settle his accompts, nor did I hear from him in all that time but once, when he informed me it was his intention to resign. If your honor thinks it proper to send Captain McNeil home with the Catawba Indians, you will please to send for him. You must be at Winchester by this time, and Captain Spotswood, having had charge of them to Williamsburg only. When I left Winchester, I had directions about carrying on the works at Fort Loudon with all possible dispatch. But a letter from Captain Mercer, which accompanied your honors, informs me that they are at a loss in respect to the manner of making the abrasures through the parapet, although I give directions in person before I came away on this lead. They propose a method that will spoil the whole work, and as I could not make them sensible of my plan by instruction only when present, I have little hope of accomplishing it by writing. Consequently, I am reduced to a disagreeable dilemma. I have directed the provision on the branch to be smoked if there are conveniences for doing it. No more forts were evacuated than were requisite to reinforce this garrison with 100 men, and to continue 100 at Fort Loudon according to order. The others are continued at their former posts, as may be seen by the return of our strength, which I have caused to be noted. A return of the Indians was sent in my last. I.M. and C. To Captain Peter Hogg, January 26, 1757. Sir, Yours from Staunton of the first instance I have received. I am sorry you did not make a final settlement of your accounts, as it was for that purpose I appointed a meeting. As I do not meddle with any accounts or vouchers relative to provision, you must still settle that matter with the commissary in the best manner you can, as it was prevented before the draw upon him for money. At present I am entirely without, and shall be until Mr. Kirkpatrick comes from Winchester. I have examined your account of contingencies and some articles without vouchers, which you ought to have known will not pass. Others which relate more particularly to yourself, such as horse feeding and I can have nothing to do with. If Edmund With's disease is found so bad as to render him unfit the service, it should be certified by the surgeon, and then Major Lewis may discharge him, till such time as the committee shall come to some determination in regard to the pay of Ensign Fleming as surgeon, and I cannot desire him to officiate in that capacity. I hope and dare believe his humanity and good disposition will induce him to assist the needy, as he has knowledge in physic. If Mr. Wright's charge against W.M. Bishop be just, it ought to be paid. With regard to David Evans, you cannot complain, when you consider that I ordered you 3 men from another company, for which you have made no allowance. The governor was forbid me listing any more servants, till the further orders. You will observe this accordingly. I am C. To Captain James Cunningham, Fort London, January 28th, 1757. Sir, when the enclosed for his Excellency the Earl of London was wrote, I was in hourly expectation of his lordship's arrival in Virginia. Since then, it is reported, and with an air of great probability, that important affairs to the northward will deprive the colony of that much desired honor and happiness this season, which you may imagine, sir, is cause also for great regret and disappointment to the well-wishers of it. I wish the enclosed camp had more order, regularity, and elegance to recommend it. It contains incontestable facts, plain and perspicuous to all who are in the least degree acquainted with our affairs, and were thrown together rather as hints that might set his lordship upon a stricter inquiry than as a full and distinct account of our circumstances. It is in this light I offer it, sir, first to your perusal, after which, if you find anything contained worth his lordship's notice, be pleased to present it. That an offensive scheme of action is necessary if it can be executed is quite obvious. Our all in the matter depends about it. The French grow more and more formidable by their alliances, while our friendly Indians are deserting our interests. Our treasury is exhausting, and our country populating. Some of the inhabitants fly entirely of, while others assemble in small forts, destitute of the necessaries of life, to see what measures will be concerted to relieve their distresses. This, sir, I assure you, is at present the situation of affairs in Virginia. I am firmly persuaded that 3,000 men, under good regulation, might fortify all the passes between this and Ohio, take possession of that river, cut off the communications between Fort Duquesne and the lakes, and with a middling train of artillery, make themselves masters of the fortress, which has now become the terror of these colonies. I have presumed to mention this, sir, from the knowledge I have of the country and enemy, and I hope I may without vanity say that there are few persons who have had better opportunity to become acquainted with both than I. I shall esteem in a particular happiness to be of your acquaintance, and to have an opportunity testifying how much I am, sir. To the Earl of Loudon, January 1757. My lord, the posture of affairs in this quarter is really melancholy, and the prospect was rendered more gloomy while there appeared no hopes of amendment. But from the presence of your lordship at this time in the Dominion, we conceive hopes of seeing these threatening clouds dispelled. The sums of money, my lord, which have been granted by this colony to carry on war, have been very considerable, and to reflect to what little purpose is matter of great concern, and will seem surprising to those who are not acquainted with the causes, and the confusion with which all our affairs have hitherto been conducted, owing to our having no fixed object, or pursuing any regular system or plan of operation. As I have studied with attention and care the nature of the service in which we are engaged, have been engaged therein from the beginning of the present broils, and have been eyewitness to all the movements and various proceedings, I beg leave to offer a concise and candid account of our circumstance to your lordship, from which many errors may be discovered that merit redress in a very high degree. It was not until it was too late we discovered that the French were on the Ohio, or rather that we could be persuaded they came there with the design to invade His Majesty's dominions. Nay, after I was sent out in December 1753, and brought undoubted testimony even from themselves of their avowed design, it was yet thought a fiction, and a scheme to promote the interest of a private company, even by some who had a share in the government. These unfavorable surmises caused great delay in raising the first men and money, and gave the active enemy time to take possession of the fork of Ohio, before we were in sufficient strength and advance thither, which has been the chief source of all our past and present misfortunes. For by this means, the French getting between us and our Indian allies, they fixed those in their interest, who were wavering, and obliged the others to neutrality, till the unhappy defeat of His Excellency General Braddock. The troops under Colonel Dunbar going into quarters in July, and the inactivity of the neighboring colonies, and the incapacity of this conspired to give the French great room to exult, and the Indians little reason to expect a vigorous offensive war on our side, and induce the other, which promised the greatest show of protection. This is an undeniable fact, and that all the Indians did not forsake the English interest till 3 months later the battle of Mongala, but actually waited to see what measures would be concerted to region our losses and afford them the protection we had but too liberally promised them. Virginia, it is true, was not inactive all this time. On the contrary, voted a handsome supply for raising men to carry on the war, or more properly to defend herself, matters being reduced to this extremity from want of assistance. But even in this she signally failed, arising, I apprehend, from the following causes. The men first levied to repel the enemy marched for Ohio, the beginning of April, 1754, without tents, without clothes, in short, without any conveniences to shelter them from the inclemency of the weather, and to make the service intolerably agreeable. In this state did they, notwithstanding, continue till the battle of the Meadows, in July following, never receiving in all that space any subsistence, and were very often under the greatest straits and difficulties for want of provisions. These things were productive of great murmurings and discontent, and rendered the service distasteful to the men, that not being paid immediately upon coming in, they thought themselves bubbled, and that no reward for the services was ever intended. This caused great desertion, and the deserters spreading over the country, recounting their sufferings and want of pay, fixed in the mind of the populace such horrid impressions of the hardships they had encountered, that no arguments could remove those prejudices, or facilitate the recruiting service. This put the Assembly upon enacting a law to impress vagrants, which added to our difficulties for compelling these abandoned miscreants into the service. They embraced every opportunity to effect their escape, gave a loose to their vicious principles, and invented the most unheard-of stories to palliate desertion and gain compassion, in which they not only succeeded but obtained protection also, so that it was next to impossible after this to apprehend deserters, while the civil officers rather connived at their escape than aided in securing them. Thus were affairs situated when we were ordered in September 1755 to recruit our force to 1,200 men. 'Tis easy, therefore, to conceive under these circumstances why we did not fulfill the order, especially when the officers were not sufficiently allowed for this arduous task. We continued, however, using our endeavors until March, following without much success. The Assembly meeting about that time came to a resolution of augmenting our number to 1,500 men, by drafting the militia, and by a clause in the act exempting all those who should pay £10. Our numbers were very little increased. One part of the people paying the sum, and many of the poor sort absconding. This was not the only pernicious clause in the act, for the funds arising from these forfeitures were thrown into the treasury. Whereas, had they been deposited in proper hands for recruiting, the money might have turned a good account. But a graver grievance in either of these was restraining the forces from marching out of the colony, or acting offensively and ordering them to build forts and garrison them along our frontiers. How equal they or any like number are to the task, and how repugnant a defensive plan is to the true interests and welfare of the colony, I submit to any judge to determine who will consider the following particulars. First, the erecting forts at greater distances than 15 or 18 miles or a day's march asunder, and garrisoning them with a less than 80 or 100 men is not answering the intention, because if they are at a greater distance from each other, it is inconvenient for the soldiers to scout them. It gives the enemy full scope to make their incursions without being discovered until they have fallen on the inhabitants and committed a ravage. And after they are discovered, the time required in assembling troops from forts more distant prevents a pursuit being made in time, and allows the enemy to escape without danger in a country so mountainous and full of swamps, hollow ways covered with woods. Then to garrison them with less than 80 or 100 men, the number is too small to afford detachments, but what are very liable to be cut off by the enemy, whose number in this close country can scarcely be known till they are proved. Indian parties are generally intermixed with some Frenchmen, and are so dexterous at skulking that their spies lying about these small forts for some days and making a prisoner, making certain discoveries of the strength of the garrison, and then, upon observing a scouting party coming out, will first cut it off, and afterwards attempt the fort. Instances of this have lately happened. Secondly, our frontiers of each extent that if the enemy were to make a formidable attack on one side, before the troops on the other could get to their assistance, they might overrun the country, and it is not improbable, if they had a design upon one part, they would make a feint upon the other. Thirdly, what it must cost the country to build these forts, and to remove stores and provisions into them. And fourthly, lastly, where and when this suspense will end. For we may be assured, if we do not endeavor to remove the cause, we shall be liable to the same incursion 7 years hence as now. Indeed, more so, because if the French are allowed to possess those lands in peace, they will have the entire command of the Indians, and grow stronger in their alliance, while we, by our defensive schemes and pusillanimous behavior, will exhaust our treasury, reduce our strength, and become the contempt of the savage nations, who are every day enriching themselves with the plunder and spoils of our people. It will evidently appear from the whole tenor of my conduct, but more especially from reiterated representations, how strongly I have urged the governor and assembly to pursue different measures, and to convince them, by all the reasons I was capable of offering, of the impossibility of covering so extensive a frontier from Indian incursions, without more force than Virginia can maintain. I have endeavored to demonstrate that it would require fewer men to remove the cause, and to prevent the effects while the cause subsists. This, notwithstanding, as I before observed, was the measure adopted, and the plan under which we have acted for 8 months past, with the disagreeable reflection of doing no essential service to our country, gaining honor to ourselves, a reputation to our regiment. However, under these disadvantageous restraints, I must beg leave to say that the regiment has not been inactive. On the contrary, it has performed a vast deal of work, and has been very alert in defending the people, which will appear by observing that, notwithstanding we are more contiguous to the French and their Indian allies, and more exposed to the frequent incursions than any of the neighboring colonies, we have not lost half the inhabitants, which others have done, but considerably more soldiers in their defense. For in the course of this campaign, since March, as our troops have been engaged in upwards of 20 skirmishes, and we have had near 100 men killed and wounded from a small regiment dispersed over the country and acting upon the defensive, as ours is by order, then I conceive will not appear inconsiderable to those who are in the last degree acquainted with the nature of this service and the posture of our affairs, however it may to chimney corner politicians, who are thirsting for news, and expecting by every express to hear in what manner Fort Duquesne was taken, and the garrison led away captive by our small numbers. Although we are restrained from making the attempt, we are hopes of success ever so rational. The next thing I shall beg leave to mention is our military laws and regulations. The first men raised, if I rightly remember, were under no law. If any, the military law which was next of kin to it. But under this we remained a short time, and instilling nations into the soldiers who knew no better, that they were governed by the articles of war. We felt little inconveniences, and the next campaign we were joined by the regulars and made subject to their laws. After the regulars left us, the assembly, as I before mentioned, passed an act in September following to raise 1,200 men, and in order to improve upon the act of Parliament, have prepared a military code of their own. What such a one is, no military discipline could be preserved by while it existed. This being represented by the most pressing and repeated remonstrances, induced the assembly to pass a bill in October following, for 1 year only, making mutiny and desertion death, but took no cognizance of many other crimes equally punishable by act of Parliament, so that no officer or soldier accused of cowardice, holding correspondence with the enemy, quitting a post, or sleeping upon it, and many other crimes of capital die or pernicious tendency could be legally tried. Neither was there any provision made for quartering or billeting of soldiers and pressing wagons and C.C. But that which contributed the most towards rendering this law inconvenient and absurd, and at the same time to demonstrate that the assembly fully intended to prevent any enterprise of their troops out of the colony, was a clause forbidding any court-martial to sit out of it, by which means all proceedings held at Fort Cumberland in Maryland were illegal, and we were obliged to remove to Virginia for trial of offenders, or act contrary to law and lie open to prosecution. How then were we to behave upon a march, perhaps 50, 80, or 100 miles distant? These circumstances concurring to render the law ineffectual, induced me again to recommend an amendment, which I did with all the force and energy of argument I was master of. But no regard has hitherto been paid to my remonstrances. To what cause it is owing, I know not, unless to short sittings and hurry of business. For I can conceive of no reason upon earth why the assembly should be against instituting rules for the regulation of their forces, which long experienced and established armies has fully evinced the necessity of. But, to cut short the account, we are under no government at all, to speak properly. Indeed, there is a jumble of laws that have little meaning or design in them, but to conspire to make the command intricate, precarious in supporting authority, and to offend the civil powers, who, tenacious of liberty, and prone to censure and condemn all proceedings which are not strictly lawful, not considering what cases may arise to render them necessary. Another grievance which this act subjects us to is the method prescribed to pay for deserters. Many of our deserters are apprehended in Maryland and Pennsylvania, and for the sake of reward are brought to the regiment. Instead, therefore, they receive certificate only that they are entitled to 200 weight of tobacco. This certificate is to be given into court of claims. They referred it to the assembly, and there it may lie, perhaps 2 or 3 years before it is paid. This causes great dissatisfaction and the ill-disposed to aid, rather than prevent, the escape of soldiers. No regular provision is established for the maimed and wounded, which is discouraging reflection and grievously complained of. The soldiers justly observe that the result of bravery is often a broken leg, arm, or incurable wound, and when they are disabled and no longer fit for service, they are discharged and reduced to the necessity of begging from door to door, or perish through indigence.
Friendly loadout drops on the way.
It is true, no instance of this kind hath yet appeared. On the contrary, the assembly hath dealt generously by those unfortunate soldiers who have met with this fate. But then this provision is not established, nor in any wise compulsory, and a man may suffer in the interval of their sitting. After giving this short and genuine account of our military laws, and then observing that these laws are expired, I conceive there need but few arguments to prove the difficulty of keeping soldiers under proper discipline, who know they are not punishable for the most atrocious crimes. When this happens to be the case, as it is ours at present, how is it to be wondered at if mutiny, desertion, and all other irregularities should creep into the camp or garrison? More especially if we consider that hard duty, want of clothes, and almost every necessary that renders a soldier's life comfortable and easy, are strong incentives, and to go further, when these in themselves intolerable grievances are set to view in the most glaring point of light by a person who lost all sense of honor and virtue, hath made use of every artifice to represent the fatigues and harshness of the service, and the ease and conveniences of the other, to seduce them from their duty. Want of clothing may be esteemed another principal grievance which our soldiers have labored under. In the first 12 months of the service they received no clothing, but in March 1754 they were presented each with a suit made of thin, sleevy cloth without lining, and flannel waistcoats of an inferior sort. After that no others were sent for, until repeated complaints and remonstrances from me, enforced in June last by representation of many gentlemen of the Assembly, induced the committee to whom those addresses were presented to send for clothing. These were to have been here by the middle of October, but no advice is received of them yet, which gives the soldiers some pretense to suspect they are deceived. And it is owing to his irregular pay and the causes aforementioned that their late disobedience ought to be ascribed, for I can truly say and confidently assert that no soldiers ever were under better command than these were before. Perhaps it may be asked, by gentlemen not thoroughly acquainted with the nature of our service, why the officers do not see that their men pay is more properly applied. In answer, I must beg leave to observe that after the soldiers have appreciated or appropriated a part of purchasing reasonable and fit necessaries, the remainder is barely sufficient to keep them in shoes, owing, in the first place, to the very great consumption the service occasions, and in the next, to the exorbitant price which this article bears. I have known a soldier go upon a command with a new pair of shoes, which shoes perhaps have stood from 7 shillings and 6 pence to 10 shillings, and return back without any. So much do they wear in wading creeks, fording rivers, clambering mountains, covered with rocks and sea. As great a grievance as any I have mentioned is yet unnoticed, i.e. the militia under the present regulation. A representation of this matter comes better and more properly from others. Yet my zeal for the service of my interests in the welfare of my country have influenced me to touch slightly on some things relative to their conduct, as I cannot enter deeply into the causes that produce them. When they come into service, it is with the utmost difficulty they are prevailed upon to take measures for self-defense, much less for the protection of the inhabitants. But indolent and careless and always unguarded are liable to be surprised. By this means Vass's fort was taken. To set forth all the reasons that and the garrison destroyed, and Dickinson's was on the point of sharing the same fate. To set forth all the reasons that contribute to render the militia of little use, and to point out all the causes which combine to make our service infinitely hard and disagreeable, would swell these observations into a volume, and require time and a more able pen than mine. Then there are yet some things that require to be spoken to the ill-judged economy that is shown in raising of men. We are either insensible of danger till it breaks upon our heads, or else throw mistaken notions of economy, evade the expense till the blow is struck, and then run into an extreme of raising militia. These, after an age, as it were, spent in assembling them, come up with a noise for a time, oppress the inhabitants, and then return, leaving the frontiers unguarded as before. Notwithstanding, former experience convinces us, if reason did not, that the French and Indians are watching their opportunity. When we are lulled into fatal security and are unprepared to resist an attack, to muster the force to invade the country, and by ravaging one part, terrify another, and then retreat when our militia assemble, repeating the stroke as soon as they are dispersed, sending down parties in the intermedium to discover our motions, procure intelligence, and sometimes to divert our troops. Such an invasion we may expect in March, if measures to prevent it are neglected as they hitherto have been. The want of tools occasions insurmountable difficulties in carrying on our works, either offensive or defensive. Cartridge paper is an article not to be met with in Virginia. And now, before I sum up the whole, I must beg leave to add my unworld endeavors are inadequately rewarded. The orders I receive are full of ambiguity. I am left like a wanderer in a wilderness to proceed at hazard. I am answerable for consequences and blamed without the privileges of defense. This, my lord, I beg leave to declare to your lordship, is at present my situation. Therefore it is not to be wondered at, if, under such peculiar circumstances, I should be sickened in a service which promises so little of soldier's reward. I have long been satisfied of the impossibility of continuing in this service without loss of honor. Indeed, I was fully convinced of it before I accepted the command the second time, and did for the reason reject the offer, not caring to expose my character to public censure. But this solicitations of the country overcame my objections and induced me to accept it.
Watch the skies.
Another reason of late has continued me in it until now, and that is the dawn of hope that arose when I heard your lordship was disdained by his majesty for the important command of his armies in America, and appointed to the government of his dominion of Virginia. Hence it was that I drew my hopes, and fondly pronounced your lordship our patron. Although I had not the honor to be known to your lordship's name was familiar to my ear, on account of the important services performed to his majesty in other parts of the world. Do not think, my lord, that I am going to flatter, notwithstanding I have exalted sentiments of your lordship's character and respect your rank. It is not my intention to adulate. My nature is open and honest and free from guile. We have, my lord, ever since our defeat at the Meadows, and behavior under his excellency General Braddock, been tantalized, nay, bid to expect most sanguinely a better establishment, and have waited in tedious expectation of seeing this accomplishment. The Assembly, it is true, have, I believe, done everything in their power to bring this about. First by soliciting his honor, the lieutenant governor, to address his majesty, and next by addressing his majesty themselves in favor of their regiment. What success these addresses have met with, I am yet a stranger to. With regard to myself, I cannot forbear adding that had his excellency General Braddock survived his unfortunate defeat, I should have met with preferment agreeable to my wishes. I had his promise to that purpose, and I believe that gentleman was too sincere and generous to make unmeaning offers, where no favors were asked. General Shirley was not unkind in his promises, but he has gone to England. I do not know, my lord, in what light this short and disinterested relation may be received by your lordship, but with utmost candor and submission it is offered. It contains no misrepresentations, nor aggravated relation of facts, nor unjust reflections. Virginia is a country young in war, and till the breaking out of these disturbances has remained in the most profound and tranquil peace, ne'er studying war, not warfare. It is not therefore to be imagined that she can fall into proper measures at once. All that can be expected at her hands she cheerfully offers, the sinews of war, and these only want your lordship's ability, the experience to be properly applied and directed. It is for this reason I have presumed to lay this information before your lordship, that if there be anything in it which appears worthy of redress, and your lordship will be condensed to point out that way it may be obtained. And now, my lord, how to apologize to your lordship for assuming a freedom which must give you trouble, I know not, unless an affectionate zeal to serve my country, steady attachment to her interests, the honor of arms, and crying grievances she is struggling under, will plead an excuse, till I am so happy as to have an opportunity of testifying how much I admire your lordship's character, and with what profound respect I have the honor to be and see. Shirley Jackson, the lottery. I'll go to that later. Alright, girls. He's in the middle of war. I hope that helped. He pointed that out. So chapter 9 of Little Women. There was Papa. Meg goes to Vanity Fair. I do not think it was the most fortunate thing in the world that those children should have the measles now, said Meg one April day as she stood packing the go-abroady trunk in her room, surrounded by her sisters. And so nice of Annie Moffat not to forget her promise. A whole fortnight of fun will be regularly splendid, replied Joe, looking like a windmill as she folded skirts with her long arms. And such lovely weather sir, I'm so glad of that, added Beth, tidily sorting neck and her hair ribbons in her best box, lint for the great occasion. I wish I was going to have a fine time and wear all these nice things, said Amy with her mouth full of pins as she artistically replenished her sister's cushion. I wish you were all going, but as you can't, I shall keep my adventures to tell you when I come back. I'm sure it's the least I can do when you have been so kind, lending me things and helping me get ready, said Meg, glancing round the room at the very simple outfit, which seemed nearly perfect in their eyes.
Playtime's over.
What did Mother give you out of the treasure box? Asked Amy, who had not been present at the opening of a certain cedar chest in which Mrs. March kept a few relics of past splendor as gifts for her girls when the proper time came. A pair of silk stockings, that pretty carved fan, and a lovely blue sash. I wanted the violet silk, but there isn't time to make it over, so I must be contented with my old tarlatan. It will look nice over my new muslin skirt, and the sash will set it off beautifully. I wish I hadn't smashed my coral bracelet, for you might have had it, said Joe, who loved to give you linen, but whose possessions were usually too dilapidated to be of much use. There's a lovely old-fashioned pearl set in the treasure chest, but Mother said real flowers were the prettiest ornament for a young girl, and Laurie promised to send me all I want, replied Meg. Now, let me see. There's my new gray walking suit. Just curl up the feather in my hat, Beth. Then my poplin for Sunday and the small party. It looks heavy for spring, doesn't it? The violet silk would be so nice. Oh dear. Never mind. You've got the tarlatan for the big part, and you always look like an angel in white, said Amy, brooding over the little store and finery in which our soul delighted. It isn't low-necked, and it doesn't sweep enough, but it will have to do. My blue house dress looks so well, turned and freshly trimmed, that I feel as if I'd got a new one. My silk sack isn't a bit of the fashion, and my bonnet doesn't look like Sally's. I didn't like to say anything, but I was sadly disappointed in my umbrella. I told Mother black with a white handle, but she'd forgotten about a green one with a yellowish handle. It's strong and neat, so I ought not to complain, but I know I shall feel ashamed of it beside Annie's silk one with a gold top, sighed Meg, surveying the little umbrella with great disfavor. Change it, advised Joe. I won't be so silly, or hurt Marmy's feelings when she took so much pains to get my things. It's a nonsensical notion of mine, and I'm not going to give it up. And I'm not going to give up to it. My silk stockings and 2 pairs of new gloves are my comfort. You are a dear to lend me yours, Joe. I feel so rich and sort of elegant, with 2 new pairs and the old ones cleaning for my common. And Meg took a refreshing peep at her glove box. Annie Moffat has blue and pink bows on her nightcaps. Would you put some on mine? She asked as Beth brought up a pile of snowy muslin, fresh from Hannah's hand. No, I wouldn't, for the smart caps won't match the plain gowns without any trimming on them. Poor folks shouldn't rig, so, said Joe decidedly. I wonder if I shall ever be happy enough to have real lace on my clothes and bows on my caps, said Meg impatiently. You said the other day that you'd be perfectly happy if you could only go to Annie Moffat's, observed Beth in her quiet way. So I did. Well, I'm happy, and I won't fret. But it does seem as if the more one gets, the more one wants, doesn't it? There, now, the trays are ready, and everything is but my ball dress, which I shall leave for Mother to pack, said Meg, cheering up as she glanced from the half-filled trunk to the many times pressed and mended white tarlatan, which she called her ball dress, with an important air. The next day was fine, and Meg departed in style for a fortnight of novelty and pleasure. Mrs. March had consented to the visit rather reluctantly, fearing that Margaret would come back more discontented than she went. But she begged so hard, and Sally had promised to take good care of her, and the little pleasure seemed so delightful after a winter of irksome work, that the mother yielded, and the daughter went to take her first taste of fashionable life.
Gas is inbound.
The Moffats were very fashionable, and simply Meg was rather daunted, at first, by the splendor of the house and the elegance of its occupants. But they were kindly people, in spite of the frivolous life they led, and soon put their guests at her ease. Perhaps Meg felt without understanding why that they were not particularly cultivated or intelligent people, and that all their gilding could not quite conceal the ordinary material of which they were made. It certainly was agreeable to fare sumptuously, drive in a fine carriage, wear her best frock every day, and do nothing but enjoy herself. It suited her exactly, and soon she began to imitate the manners and conversation of those about her, to put on little airs and graces, use French phrases, crimp her hair, take in her dresses, and talk about the fashions as well as she could. The more she saw of Annie Moffat's pretty things, the more she envied her and sighed to be rich. Home now looked bare and dismal as she thought of it. Work grew harder than ever, and she felt that she was a very destitute and much injured girl, in spite of the new gloves and silk stockings. She had not much time for repining, however, for 3 young girls were busily employed in having good time. They shopped, walked, rode, and called all day, went to theaters and operas, or frolicked at home in the evening, for Annie had many friends and knew how to entertain them. Her older sisters were very fine young ladies, and one was engaged, which was extremely interesting and romantic. Mr. Moffat was a fat, jolly old gentleman who knew her father, and Mrs. Moffat, a fat, jolly old lady who took as great a fancy to Meg as her daughter had done. Everyone petted her, and Daisy, as they called her, was in a fair way to have her head turned. When the evening for the small party came, she found what the pot plan wouldn't do at all, for the other girls were putting on thin dresses and making themselves very fine indeed. So out came the tarleton, looking older, limper, and shabbier than ever beside Sally's crisp new one. Meg saw the girls glance at it and then at another, and her cheeks began to burn, for with all her gentleness she was very proud. No one said a word about it, but Sally offered to dress her hair, and Annie to tie her sash, and Belle, the engaged sister, praised her white arms. But in their kindness Meg saw only pity for her poverty, and her heart felt very heavy as she stood by herself, while the others laughed, chattered, and flew about like gauzy butterflies. The hard, bitter feeling was getting pretty bad when the maid brought in a box of flowers. Before she could speak, Annie had the cover off, and all were exclaiming at the lovely rose, heath, and fern within. "It's for Belle, of course. George always sends her some, but these are altogether ravishing," cried Annie with a great sniff. "They are for Miss March," the man said, "and here's a note," put in the maid, holding it to Meg. "What fun! Who are they from?" "Didn't know you had a lover," cried the girls, fluttering about Meg, a high state of curiosity and surprise. "The note is from Mother, and the flowers from Laurie," said Meg simply, yet much gratified that he had not forgotten her. "Oh, indeed," said Annie with a funny look, as Meg slipped the note into her pocket as a sort of talisman against easily damaging false pride, for the few loving words had done her good, and the flowers cheered her up by their beauty. Feeling almost happy again, she laid by a few ferns and roses for herself, and quickly made up the rest in dainty bouquets for the breasts air, or skirts of her friends, offering them so prettily that Clara, the elder sister, told her that she was the sweetest little thing she ever saw, and looked quite charmed with her small attention. Somehow the kind act finished her despondency, and when all the rest went to show themselves to Mrs. Moffat, she saw a happy, bright-eyed face in the mirror, as she laid her ferns against her rippling hair and fastened the rose in the dress that didn't strike her as so very shabby now. She enjoyed herself very much that evening, for she danced at her heart's content. Everyone was very kind, and she had 3 compliments. Annie made her sing, and someone said she had a remarkable fine voice. Major Lincoln asked who the fresh little girl with the beautiful eyes was, and Mr. Moffat insisted on dancing with her because she didn't dawdle, but had some spring in her, as he gracefully expressed it. So altogether she had a very nice time. till she overheard a bit of conversation which disturbed her extremely. She was sitting just inside the conservatory, waiting for her partner to bring her an ice, when she heard a voice ask on the other side of the flowery wall, "How old is he?" 16 or 17, I should say, replied another voice. "It would be a grand thing for one of these girls, wouldn't it? Sally says they are very intimate now, and the old man quite dotes on them. Mrs. M has made her plans, I dare say, and will play her cards well, early as it is. The girl evidently doesn't think of it yet," said Mrs. Moffat. She told the fib about her mamma, as if she did know, and colored up when the flowers came quite prettily. Poor thing. She'd be so nice if she was only got up in style. "Do you think she'd be offended if we offered to lend her a dress for Thursday?" asked another voice. "She's proud, but I don't believe she'd mind. For thou Dottie Tarleton's all she has got. She may tear it tonight, and that will be as good excuse for offspring a decent one."
Changing mags!
Here Meg's partner appeared to find her looking much flushed and rather agitated. She was proud, and her pride was useful just then, for it helped her hide her mortification, anger, and disgust at what she had just heard. For innocent and unspeakuous as she was, she could not help understanding the gossip of her friends. She tried to forget it, but could not, and kept repeating to herself, "Mrs. M has made her plans. That fib about her mamma, and Dowdy Tarleton," till she was ready to cry and rush home to tell her troubles and ask for advice. As that was impossible, she did her best to seem gay, and being rather excited, she succeeded so well that no one dreamed what an effort she was making. She was very glad when it was all over, and she was quiet in her bed, where she could think and wonder and fume till her head ached and her hot cheeks were cooled by a few natural terrors. Those foolish yet well-meant words had opened a new world to Meg, and much disturbed the peace of the old one in which till now she had lived as happily as a child. Her innocent friendship with Laurie was spoiled by the silly speeches she had overheard. Her faith in her mother was a little shaken by the worldly plans attributed to her by Mrs. Moffat, who judged others by herself, in a sensible resolution to be contented with the simple wardrobe which suited a poor man's daughter, was weakened by the unnecessary pity of girls who thought a shabby dress one of the greatest calamities under heaven. Poor Meg had a restless night, and got up heavy-eyed, unhappy, half resentful toward her friend, and half ashamed of herself for not speaking out frankly and setting everything right. Everybody dawdled that morning, and it was noon before the girls found energy enough to take up their worst work. Something in the matter of her friend struck Meg at once. They treated her with more respect, she thought, took quite a tender interest in what she said, and looked at her with eyes that plainly betrayed curiosity. All this surprised and flattered her, though she did not understand it till Miss Bell looked up from her writing, and said with a sentimental air, "Daisy, dear, I've sent an invitation to your friend, Mr. Lawrence, for Thursday. We should like to know him, and it's only a proper compliment to you." Meg colored, but a mischievous fancy to tease the girls made her reply dourly, "You are very kind, but I'm afraid he won't come." "Why not, cherie?" asked Miss Bell. "He's too old." "My child, what do you mean? What is his age? I beg to know," cried Miss Clara. "Nearly 70, I believe," answered Meg, counting stitches to hide the merriment in her eyes. "You sly creature. Of course we meant the young man," exclaimed Miss Bell, laughing. "There isn't any. Laurie's only a little boy." And Meg laughed also at the queer look which the sisters exchanged. She thus described her supposed lover. "About your age," Nan said. "Near my sister Joe's. I am 17 in August," returned Meg, tossing her head. "It's very nice of him to send you flowers, isn't it?" said Annie, looking wise about nothing. "Yes, he often does to all of us, for their house is full, and we are so fond of them." My mother and old Mr. Lawrence are friends, you know, so it is quite natural that we children should play together. And Meg hoped they would say no more. It's evident Daisy isn't out yet, said Miss Clara to Belle with a nod. Quite a pastoral state of innocence all around, returned Miss Belle with a shrug. I'm going out to get some little matters for my girls. Can I do anything for you, young ladies? Asked Miss Moffat, lumbering like an elf in silken lace. No, thank you, ma'am, replied Sally. What the?
I'm reloading.
I've got my UP soap reserved and don't want to think. Nor I, began Meg, but stopped because it occurred to her that she did not want several things and could not have them. What shall you wear? Asked Sally. My old white one again, if I can mend it fit to be seen. It got sadly torn last night, said Meg, trying to speak quite easily, but feeling very uncomfortable. Why don't you send home for another? Said Sally, who was not an observing young lady. I haven't got another. It cost Meg an effort to say that, but Sally did not see it and exclaimed in amiable surprise. Only that? How funny. She did not finish her speech, for Belle shook her head at her and broke in, saying kindly, Not at all. Where's the use of having a lot of dresses when she isn't out yet? There's no need of sending home Daisy, even if you had a dozen, for I've got a sweet blue silk laid away, which I've outgrown, and you shall wear it to please me, won't you, dear? You are very kind, but I don't mind my old dress, if you don't. It does well enough for a little girl like me, said Meg. Now, do let me please myself by dressing you up in style. I admire to it, and you'd be a regular little beaut with a touch here and there. I shan't let anyone see you till you are done, and then we'll burst upon them like Cinderella and her godmother going to the ball, said Belle in her persuasive tone. Meg couldn't refuse the offer so kindly made, for I desired to see if she would be a little beauty after touching up caused her to accept and forget all her former uncomfortable feelings toward the Moffats. On the Thursday evening, Belle shut herself up with her maid, and between them they turned Meg into a fine lady. They crimped and curled her hair, they polished her neck and arms with some fragrant powder, touched her lips with coralline salve to make them redder, and Hortense would have added a soupçon of rouge if Meg had not rebelled. They laced her into a sky-blue dress, which was so tight she could hardly breathe, and so low in the neck that modest Meg blushed at herself in the mirror. A set of silver filigree was added, bracelets, necklace, brooch, and even earrings, for Hortense tied them on with a bit of pink silk which did not show. A cluster of tea rose buds at the bosom and a ruche reconciled Meg to the display of her pretty white shoulders, and a pair of high-heeled silk boots satisfied the last wish of her heart. A lace handkerchief, a plumy fan, and a bouquet and a shoulder holder finished her off, and Miss Belle surveyed her with the satisfaction of a little girl with a newly dressed doll. Mademoiselle is charmante, très jolie, is she not? Cried Hortense, clasping her hand in an affected rapture. Come and show yourself, said Miss Belle, leading the way to the others were waiting. As Meg went rustling after her with her long skirts trailing, her earrings twinkling, her curls waving, and her heart beating, she felt as if her fun had really begun at last, for the mirror had plainly told her that she was a little beauty. Her friends repeated the pleasing phrase enthusiastically, and for several minutes she stood like a jackdaw on the fable, enjoying her borrowed plumes, while the rest chattered like party bagpipes. Well, I dress. Do you drill her? Nan, in the management of her skirt and those French heels, or she will trip herself up. Take your silver butterfly and catch up that long curl on the left side of her head, Clara, and don't any of you disturb the charming work of my hands, said Belle as she uttered away, looking well pleased with her success. "I'm afraid to go down. I feel so queer and stiff and half-dressed," said Meg to Sally as the bell rang, and Mrs. Moffat sent to ask the young ladies to appear at once. "You don't look a bit like yourself, but you are very nice. I'm nowhere beside you, for Belle has heaps of taste, and you're quite French, I assure you. Let your flowers hang. Don't be so careful at them. And be sure you don't trip," returned Sally, trying not to care that Meg was prettier than herself. Keeping that warning carefully in mind, Margaret got safely downstairs and sailed into the drawing rooms, where the Moffats and a few early guests were assembled. She very soon discovered that there is a charm about fine clothes which attracts a certain class of people and secures their respect. Several young ladies who had taken no notice of her before were very affectionate all of a sudden. Several young gentlemen who had only stared at her at the other party now not only stared but asked to be introduced, and said all manner of foolish but agreeable things to her. And several old ladies who sat on the sofas had criticized the rest of the party, inquired who she was with an air of interest. She heard Miss Moffat reply to one of them, "Daisy March, father a colonel in the army, one of our first families, but reversed the fortune, you know. Intimate friends of the Lawrences. Sweet creature, I assure you, my Ned is quite wild about her." "Dear me," said the old lady, putting up her glass for another observation of Meg, who tried to look as if she had not heard, and been rather shocked at Mrs. Moffat's fibs. The queer feeling did not pass away, but she imagined herself acting the new part of fine lady, and so got on pretty well. Though the tight dress gave her a side ache, the train kept getting under her feet, and she was in constant fear lest her earrings should fly off and get lost or broken. She was flirting her fan and laughing at the futile jokes of a young gentleman who tried to be witty, when she suddenly stopped laughing and looked confused, for just opposite she saw Lord, who was staring at her with undisguised surprise and disapproval also. She thought, for though he bowed and frowned at something in his honest eyes made her blush, and wish she had her old dress on. To complete her confusion, she saw Belle nudge Annie, and both glanced from her lord, who, she was happy to see, looked unusually boyish and shy. Silly creatures, to put such thoughts into my head. I won't care for it, or let it change me a bit, thought Meg, and rustled across the room to shake hands with her friend. "I'm glad you came. I was afraid you wouldn't," she said, with her most grown-up air. "Joe wanted me to come to tell her how you looked, so I did," answered Laurie, without turning his eyes upon her, though he half smiled at her maternal tone. "What shall you tell her?" asked Meg, full of curiosity to know his opinion of her, yet feeling ill at ease with him for the first time. "I shall say I didn't know you, for you look so grown-up and unlike yourself, I'm quite afraid of you," he said, fumbling at his glove button. "How absurd of you. The girls dress me up for fun, and I rather like it. Wouldn't Joe stare if she saw me?" said Meg, bent on making him say whether he thought her improved or not. "Yes, I think she would," returned Laurie gravely. "Don't you like me so?" asked Meg. "No, I don't," was the blunt reply. "Why not?" in an anxious tone. He glanced at her frizzled head, bare shoulders, and fantastically trimmed dress, with an expression that abashed her more than his answer, which had not a particle of his usual politeness in it. "I don't feel like fuss and feathers." That was altogether too much from a lad younger than herself, and Meg walked away, saying petulantly, "You are the rudest boy I ever saw." Feeling very much ruffled, she went and stood in a quiet window to cool her cheeks, for the tight dress gave her an uncomfortably brilliant color. As she stood there, Major Lincoln passed by, and a minute after she heard him saying to his mother, "They are making a fool of that little girl. I wanted you to see her, but they have spoiled her entirely. She's nothing but a doll tonight." "Oh dear," sighed Meg, "I wish I'd been sensible and worn my own things, and I should have not disgusted other people, or felt so uncomfortable and ashamed of myself." She leaned her forehead on the cool pane and stood half hidden by the curtains, never minding that her favorite waltz had begun, till someone touched her, and turned. She saw Laurie looking penitent, as he said, with his very best bow and his hand out, "Please forgive my rudeness, and come dance with me." "I'm afraid it will be too disagreeable to you," said Meg, trying to look offended and falling entirely. "Not a bit of it. I'm dying to do it. Come, I'll be good. I don't like your gown, but I do think you are just splendid." And he waved his hands as if words failed to express his admiration. Meg smiled and relented, and whispered as they stood waiting to catch the time, "Take care my skirt doesn't trip you up. It's the plague of my life, and I was a goose to wear it." "Pin it round your neck, and then it will be useful," said Laurie, looking down at the little blue boots, which he evidently approved of. Away they went fleetly and gracefully, for having practiced at home, they were well matched, and all the blithe young people were a pleasant sight to see as they twirled merrily round and round, feeling more friendly than ever after their small tiff. "Laurie, I want you to do me a favor, will you?" said Meg as he stood fanning her when her breath gave out, which it did very soon, though she would not own why. "Won't I?" said Laurie with alacrity. "Please don't tell them at home about my dress tonight. They won't understand the joke, and it will worry Mother." "Then why did you do it?" said Laurie's eye so plainly that Meg hastily added, "I shall tell them myself all about it, and confess to Mother how silly I've been. But I'd rather do it myself. So you'll not tell, will you?" "I give you my word I won't. Only what shall I say when you ask me?" "Just say I looked pretty well and was having a good time." "I'll say the first with all my heart, but how about the other? You don't look as if you were having a good time, are you?" And Laurie looked at her with an expression which made her answer in a whisper, "No, not just now. Don't think I'm horrid. I only wanted a little fun, but this sort doesn't pay, I find, and I'm getting tired of it. Here comes Ned Muffet. What does he want?" said Laurie, knitting his black brows as if he did not regard his young host in the light of a pleasant addition to the party. "He put his name down for 3 dances, and I suppose he's coming for them." "What a bore," said Meg, assuming a languid air which amused Laurie immensely. He did not speak to her again till supper time, when he saw her drinking champagne with Ned and his friend Fisher, who was behaving like a pair of fools, as Laurie said to himself, for he felt a brotherly sort of right to watch over the marches and fight over the battles whenever a defender was needed. "You'll have a splitting headache tomorrow if you drink much of that." "I wouldn't, Meg. Your mother doesn't like it, you know," he whispered, leaning over his chair as Ned turned to refill her glass, and Fisher stooped to pick her up her fan. "I'm not Meg tonight. I'm a doll, who does all sorts of crazy things. Tomorrow I shall put away my fuss and feathers, and be desperately good again," she answered with an affected little laugh. "Wish tomorrow was here then," muttered Laurie, walking off, ill-pleased at the change he saw her in. Meg danced and flirted, chattered and giggled, as other girls did. After supper she undertook the German, and blundered through it, nearly upsetting her partner with her long skirt and romping in a way that scandalized Laurie, who looked on and meditated a lecture. But he got no chance to deliver it, for Meg was kept away from him till he came to say good night. "Remember," she said, trying to smile, for the splitting headache had already begun. "Silence à la mort," replied Laurie with a melodramatic flourish as he went away. This little bit of byplay excited Annie's curiosity, but Meg was too excited for gossip and went to bed, feeling as if he had been to a masquerade and hadn't enjoyed herself as much as she expected. She was sick all the next day, and on Saturday went home, quite used up with her fortnight's fun and feeling that she had sat in the lap of luxury long enough. It does seem pleasant to be quiet and not have company manners all the time. Home is a nice place, though it isn't splendid, said Meg, looking about her with a wistful expression, as she sat with her mother and Joe on the Sunday evening. I'm glad to hear you say, dear, for I was afraid home would seem dull and poor to you after your fine quarters, replied her mother, who had given her many anxious looks that day, for motherly eyes are quick to see any change in children's faces. Meg had told her adventures gaily, and said over and over what a charming time she had, but something still seemed to weigh upon her spirits, and when the younger girls were gone to bed, she sat thoughtfully staring at the fire, saying little and looking worried. As the clock struck 9 and Joe proposed bed, Meg suddenly left her chair and, taking Beth's stool, leaned her elbows on her mother's knee, saying bravely, "Marmee, I want to fess." "I thought so. What is it, dear?" "Shall I go away?" asked Joe discreetly. "Of course not. Don't. I always tell you everything. I was ashamed to speak of it before the younger children, but I want you to know all the dreadful things I did as a moffat." "We are prepared," said Mrs. March, smiling, but looking a little anxious. "I told you they dressed me up, but I didn't tell you that they powdered and squeezed and frizzled and made me look like a fashion plate. Laurie thought I wasn't proper. I know he did, though he didn't say so, and one man called me a doll. I knew it was silly, but they flattered me, and I said I was a beauty in quantities of nonsense, so I let them make me a fool of me." "Is that all?" asked Joe, as Mrs. March looked silently at the downcast face of her pretty daughter, and could not find it in her heart to blame her little follies. "No, I drank champagne and romped and tried to flirt and was altogether abominable," and Meg self-reproachfully said Meg. "There is something more, I think." And Mrs. March smoothed the soft cheek, which suddenly grew rosy as Meg answered slowly, "Yes, it's very silly, but I want to tell it, because I hate to have people say, and I think such things about us and Laurie." Then she told the various bits of gossip she had heard at the Moffats, and as she spoke, Joe saw her mother fold her lips tightly, as if ill-pleased that such ideas should be put into Meg's innocent mind. "Well, if that isn't the greatest rubbish I ever heard," cried Joe indignantly, "why didn't you pop out and tell them so on the spot?" "I couldn't. It was so embarrassing for me I couldn't help hearing it first, and then I was so angry and ashamed I didn't remember that I ought to go away. Just wait till I see Annie Moffat, and I'll show you how to settle such ridiculous stuff. The idea of having plans and being kind to Laurie because he's rich and may marry us by and by. Won't he shout when I tell him what those silly things say about us poor children?" And Joe laughed, as if on second thoughts the thing struck her as a good joke. "If you tell Laurie, I'll never forgive you. She mustn't, must she, Mother?" And Meg, looking distressed. "No, never repeat that foolish gossip, and forget it as soon as you can," said Mrs. March gravely. "I was very unwise to let you go among people of whom I know so little. Kind, I dare say, but worldly, ill-bred, and full of those vulgar ideas about young people. I am more sorry than I can express for the mischief this visit may have done you, Meg." "Don't be sorry. I won't let it hurt me. I'll forget all that bad and remember only the good. For I did enjoy a great deal, and thank you very much for letting me go." I'll not be sentimental or dissatisfied, Mother. I know I'm a silly little girl, and I'll stay with you till I'm fit to take care of myself. But it is nice to be praised and admired, and I can't help saying I like it," said Meg, looking half ashamed of the confession. "That is perfectly natural and quite harmless, if the liking does not become a passion and lead one to do foolish, unmaidenly things. Learn to know and value the praise which is worth having, and to excite the admiration of excellent people by being modest as well as pretty Meg." Margaret sat thinking a moment, while Jo stood with her hands behind her, looking both interested and a little perplexed, for it was a new thing to see Meg blushing and talking about admiration, lovers, and things of that sort, and Jo felt as if during that fortnight her sister had grown up amazingly, and was drifting away from her into a world where she could not follow. "Mother, do you have plans, as Mrs. Moffat said?" asked Meg bashfully. "Yes, my dear, I have a great many. All mothers do, but mine differ somewhere but from Mrs. Moffat's. I suspect I will tell you some of them for the first time when a word may set this romantic little head and heart of yours right on a very serious subject. You are young, Meg, but not too young to understand me, and mother's lips are the fittest to speak of such things to girls like you. Jo, your turn will come in time, perhaps, so listen to my plans and help me carry them out if they are good." Jo went and sat on one arm of the chair, looking as if she thought they were about to join in some very solemn affair. Holding the hand of each and watching the two young faces wistfully, Mrs. March said in her serious yet cheery way, "I want my daughters to be beautifully accomplished and good, to be admired, loved, and respected, to have a happy youth, to be well and wisely married, and to lead useful, pleasant lives, with as little care and sorrow to try them as God sees fit to send. To be loved and chosen by a good man is the best and sweetest thing which can happen to a woman, and I sincerely hope my girls may know this beautiful experience. It is natural to think of it, Meg, right to hope and wait for it, and wise to prepare for it, so that when the happy time comes you may feel ready for the duties and worthy of the joy. My dear girls, I am ambitious for you, but not to have you make a dash in the world, marry rich men merely because they are rich, or have splendid houses, which are not homes because love is wanting. Money is a needful and precious thing, and we'll use the noble thing. But I never want to think it is for first or only prize to strive for, or I'd rather see you poor men's wives, if you were happy, beloved, contented, than queens on thrones, without self-respect and peace." "Right, Jo. Better be happy old maids than unhappy wives, or unmaidly girls running about to find husbands," said Mrs. March decidedly. "Don't be troubled, Meg. Poverty seldom daunts a sincere lover, some of the best and most honored women I know were poor girls, but so love-worthy that they were not allowed to be old maids. Leave these things to time. Make this home happy, so that you may be fit for homes of your own, if they are offered you, and contented here if they are not. One thing remember, my girls, mother is always ready to be your confidant, father to be your friend, and both of us hope and trust that our daughters, whether married or single, will be pride and comfort of our lives. We will, Marmee, we will, cried both, with all their hearts, that she bade them good night.